Most men believe that if a woman walks away, she feels relief. They imagine her moving on easily, forgetting quickly and replacing them without a second thought. That belief is comforting, but it is also dangerously false. What most men never see is what happens after the noise fades, after the attention stops, after the emotional safety disappears, after the man she assumed would always be there is suddenly gone. Stoicism teaches a truth that modern dating advice avoids because it is uncomfortable. A woman does not feel loss immediately. She feels loss later when certainty turns into silence. At first, she feels freedom, control, emotional dominance. She believes nothing valuable was lost because nothing was demanded. But the human mind does not process loss through logic. It processes loss through contrast. And contrast only appears when absence becomes permanent. When you were present, calm and emotionally stable, her nervous system adjusted to your presence as a baseline. Not excitement, not drama, stability. And stability is invisible until it is gone. This is why many women only realize the weight of a man after he disappears without resistance. No chasing, no emotional collapse, no attempt to prove his value. Stoicism teaches that what is given freely is rarely appreciated, but what leaves cleanly is deeply felt when you did not beg. When you did not demand answers, when you did not fight to stay relevant, you removed emotional certainty. And certainty is addictive. A woman does not miss the man who made her feel desired. She misses the man who made her feel anchored, the one whose presence quietly regulated her emotions without her noticing, the one whose calm absorbed chaos instead of creating it. This is where the realization begins. Not when you leave, not when you stop texting, but when she reaches for emotional stability and it is no longer there. Her days feel slightly heavier. Her reactions feel less grounded. Her confidence feels untested. And slowly, an uncomfortable thought forms. He mattered more than I admitted. Most men never reach this stage because they chase reassurance. They explain themselves. They ask for closure. They try to be remembered. But the Stoic man does something far more powerful. He leaves without emotional residue. This video is not about revenge. It is not about making her regret, and it is not about manipulation. It is about understanding why loss is only felt when peace disappears, and why the man who leaves with self-respect becomes emotionally irreplaceable. By the end of this video, you will understand why she feels your loss later, not immediately, why calm presence is more valuable than emotional intensity, and why her realization comes only when control is gone. If you've ever wondered why a woman suddenly changes once you truly detach, stay with me, because once you understand this stoic truth, you stop chasing recognition and start understanding power. Before we start, a quick reminder. The real transformation doesn't happen on YouTube. It happens inside the community. If these videos have opened your eyes, what's inside will rebuild your mindset completely. It's not just a course, it's a brotherhood. A private space where men master attraction, emotional control, and the psychology of power. You don't join for a month, you join for life. Every future course, book, and lesson is yours forever. No subscriptions, no limits. Just one decision that changes your direction. If you're serious about growth, discipline, and purpose, click the link below. Join the community, enroll once, grow forever. Let's dive in. Section 1. Why she does not feel the loss at first. One of the biggest misunderstandings men have about loss is timing. Most men assume that the moment they leave, the impact should be immediate, emotional, and obvious. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Loss is rarely felt when it first happens because the mind initially experiences relief, not absence. When you step away calmly and without resistance, a woman does not feel pain. She feels control. She feels space. She feels certainty that nothing essential was removed. At first, her emotional system tells her that she made the right decision. There is no conflict to process, no emotional backlash to manage, and no tension demanding resolution. Your calm exit allows her nervous system to settle. And when the nervous system settles, the mind assumes stability still exists. She believes she can access it again if she ever wants to. This illusion is critical because it delays the awareness of loss. Stoicism explains that people do not miss what they believe is still available. As long as she assumes your emotional presence remains accessible, even in silence, there is no urgency to feel absence. Most men unknowingly reinforce this illusion by checking in, explaining themselves, or leaving emotional traces behind. They keep the door emotionally open, and as long as that door exists, loss cannot register. But when you leave cleanly without emotional residue, something very different happens beneath the surface. Her mind does not immediately register pain because nothing dramatic occurred. There was no argument to justify guilt, no emotional collapse to validate her decision, and no anger to confirm importance. Everything felt calm, and calm endings are deceptive. Stoicism teaches that the mind only recognizes loss when contrast appears. Contrast requires time. It requires moments when emotional stability is expected but no longer present. It requires situations where she unconsciously reaches for your grounding presence and realizes it is no longer there. Only then does the realization begin to form. This is why the strongest emotional impact is delayed. It arrives quietly without warning when she is no longer thinking about you directly. She feels it when her emotions feel less regulated, when her confidence feels less anchored, and when her sense of emotional safety feels subtly disrupted. She may not connect this immediately to you, but the absence is already working. Most men never allow this process to complete. They interrupt it with emotional reminders. They seek reassurance, closure, or recognition. In doing so, they prevent the mind from fully experiencing the contrast. The Stoic man does not do this. He understands that real loss can only be felt when access is truly gone, and that is why she does not feel your loss at first. She feels it later when certainty dissolves and absence finally becomes real. Section 2. The moment certainty breaks and realization begins. The realization does not begin when you leave. It begins when her assumption of access quietly collapses. As long as a woman believes that your emotional presence is still reachable, even in theory, her mind remains calm. Stoicism teaches that perceived availability neutralizes loss, but the moment she senses that access has truly disappeared, something internal shifts. This often happens in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. She reaches for emotional grounding during stress, confusion, or uncertainty, and your presence is no longer there to absorb it. There is no message to send, no reaction to test, and no reassurance to extract. That is when the mind notices the difference, not consciously at first, but somatically. Her emotional system feels less supported, less regulated, less steady. Most men underestimate how much their calm presence stabilizes emotional environments. You may not have been intense or expressive, but you were consistent, grounded, and emotionally contained. That containment allowed her nervous system to relax. When that regulation disappears, she begins to feel the absence indirectly through contrast rather than memory. Stoicism teaches that humans only recognize value when it is no longer available. This recognition does not come as nostalgia. It comes as discomfort. Something feels off. Something feels heavier. Something feels missing. Even if she cannot immediately name it, the realization creeps in quietly because the loss was quiet. This is why she does not immediately think of you. Instead, she thinks of how things feel now. Her emotional baseline has shifted, and the mind searches for the cause. Slowly, the association forms. You were the one constant that is no longer there. Not because you demanded importance, but because your presence was reliable. Most men sabotage this moment by re-entering emotionally. They respond when she reaches out vaguely. They offer emotional support without alignment. They restore access prematurely. And by doing so, they reset her sense of certainty. The Stoic man does not do this. He understands that realization requires uninterrupted absence. When certainty breaks, the mind begins re-evaluating the past, not with longing, but with clarity. She starts noticing what you provided without noise or pressure: emotional steadiness, calm containment, a sense of grounding she took for granted. This is the precise moment her realization begins, not because you asked to be valued, but because the value you offered is no longer available. Section 3. Why her realization turns into emotional pool. Once certainty breaks, the mind does not simply accept the loss and move on. Stoicism teaches that when emotional stability is removed without chaos, the psyche searches for restoration. This is where realization quietly transforms into emotional pull. She does not suddenly miss you romantically. She begins feeling the absence of something that regulated her emotional world. Most women do not consciously recognize how much emotional containment they receive from a calm, grounded man. Your presence did not excite her nervous system. It stabilized it. That stability becomes visible only when it is gone. When stress rises, decisions feel heavier, or emotions feel less anchored. Her mind begins associating the difference with you. This is where emotional pull forms, not from desire, but from contrast. The present feels less settled than the past, and the mind instinctively reaches backward to restore equilibrium. She may not frame it as missing you. She frames it as curiosity, reflection, or sudden awareness of your importance. But the pull is emotional, not logical. Stoicism explains that humans are drawn back toward what once created internal order. When you left without emotional disturbance, you did not create drama to process. You created silence to feel, and silence amplifies contrast. The emotional system begins recalibrating around the absence, and that recalibration feels uncomfortable. Most men misinterpret this phase. They believe emotional pull equals renewed attraction, and they rush to capitalize on it. They re-engage emotionally, seek clarity, or attempt to restart the connection prematurely. In doing so, they collapse the very contrast that created the pull. The Stoic man does not move impulsively. He understands that emotional gravity strengthens only when the absence remains clean. As the pool deepens, she begins replaying interactions, not for romance, but for understanding. Why did he remain calm? Why didn't he need reassurance? Why didn't he fight? These questions are not about love. They are about control. Her mind is trying to locate where emotional leverage was lost. This is why emotional pull feels confusing to her. It does not come with certainty or desire. It comes with restlessness, a sense that something meaningful slipped away unnoticed. And the more she tries to resolve that feeling internally, the stronger the pull becomes. Stoicism teaches patience over reaction. When you remain detached, aligned, and focused on your own path, you allow this emotional pull to mature naturally. It is not forced. It is not triggered. It is the mind's response to the absence of calm it once relied on. And that is why her realization does not fade. It transforms into a pull she cannot easily ignore because it was never about wanting you. It was about losing the emotional order you represented. Section 4. Why her behavior shifts before her mind admits it. Before a woman consciously admits that your absence affected her, her behavior begins changing quietly. Stoicism teaches that behavior always shifts before awareness catches up. The emotional system reacts first, and only later does the mind attempt to explain what is happening. This is why her actions may surprise even her. She becomes more observant. She checks indirectly. She reacts to your presence or absence in subtle ways. She may bring you up casually, revisit shared spaces online, or test emotional access without clearly stating intention. These are not strategic moves. They are instinctive attempts to restore emotional equilibrium. When your calm presence is removed, her nervous system looks for familiar grounding. And because you left without emotional disturbance, there is no negative narrative to block that impulse. You did not hurt her. You did not pressure her. You did not collapse. You simply disappeared with dignity. That makes reaching back feel emotionally safe, even if confusing. Stoicism explains that humans reach for stability before they reach for desire. This is why her behavior shifts even if her mind insists she was never interested. Emotional regulation matters more than attraction at this stage. She is responding to the loss of something that quietly supported her inner balance. Most men misread this phase and break it. They interpret behavioral shifts as renewed interest and rush forward emotionally. They explain themselves. They seek reassurance. They try to secure clarity. In doing so, they reintroduce emotional noise and restore her sense of control. The Stoic man does not do this. He remains steady, responsive without eagerness, present without emotional investment. As her behavior continues adjusting, she may feel internal contradiction. Her logic says she moved on. Her emotions say something is unresolved. This contradiction creates tension, and tension keeps attention alive. She may not label it as needing you, but she feels drawn toward the calm she no longer has access to. This is why the shift happens silently. No confession, no sudden apology, just a gradual change in how she orients towards you. Her behavior reveals the impact long before her words ever could. Stoicism teaches that influence is quiet. When you maintain inner order while others adjust around you, you know the dynamic has changed. And by the time her mind catches up, the loss is already deeply felt. Section 5. The moment she realizes she needed you more than she admitted, there comes a moment when subtle discomfort turns into undeniable clarity. Stoicism teaches that realization is not sudden. It accumulates quietly until the mind can no longer ignore the pattern. This is the point where she stops feeling off and starts understanding why. She recognizes that what is missing is not attention, affection, or romance, but emotional stability that once existed effortlessly. At this stage, she begins connecting the dots. The calm she felt around you, the absence of pressure, the way her emotions felt contained rather than stimulated. She realizes that while she may not have labeled it as interest, she relied on your presence more than she allowed herself to acknowledge. And reliance, once noticed, changes perception instantly. Stoicism explains that people often mistake emotional grounding for emotional neutrality. Because you did not overwhelm her with desire or demand, your value went unnoticed. But now, in your absence, that grounding becomes visible through contrast. She notices how interactions feel less steady, how decisions feel heavier, and how emotional noise feels louder than before. This realization is uncomfortable because it challenges her self-narrative. She believed she was unaffected. She believed she was in control. Now she must reconcile the fact that your presence mattered in ways she never consciously admitted. This internal conflict intensifies the emotional pull because it threatens emotional certainty. Most men never reach this phase because they intervene too early. They reappear emotionally, explain themselves, or seek recognition. By doing so, they allow her to attribute comfort to availability rather than loss. The Stoic man does not interrupt this realization. He allows silence to do the work. When realization fully forms, it does not look like regret. It looks like recalibration. She reassesses the connection, not emotionally, but structurally. She sees that you represented stability, self-command, and emotional containment without demand, and those qualities feel far more valuable once they are no longer accessible. This is the moment she understands that she did not just lose a man. She lost a state of emotional order she did not know how to replace, and that understanding changes how she sees you permanently, whether she acts on it or not. Section 6. Why realization turns into respect and emotional gravity. Once she understands what she lost, something more profound than longing takes shape. Stoicism teaches that desire fades, but respect anchors. When a woman realizes that your presence brought emotional order rather than emotional stimulation, her perception shifts from emotion to evaluation. She begins seeing you not as someone she interacted with, but as someone who stood firmly within himself regardless of outcome. This is where emotional gravity forms. Gravity is not created by pursuit. It is created by mass, by weight, by substance. When you did not chase, explain, or attempt to reclaim importance, you demonstrated that your value was self-contained. That realization produces respect, because respect is born when someone recognizes that your stability did not depend on their approval. At this stage, she no longer feels control. She feels distance. And distance combined with respect is powerful. She understands that you did not leave to teach a lesson, provoke regret, or extract validation. You left because your inner order did not allow you to remain emotionally unaligned. That clarity reframes the entire dynamic. Stoicism teaches that the strongest influence is not emotional intensity, but consistency of character. When your character remained intact before, during, and after the separation, it created a through line her mind could not ignore. You became someone who stood for something, rather than someone who reacted to something. This is why her feelings may deepen even as contact remains minimal. Respect does not need proximity to grow. In fact, distance often sharpens it. She senses that access to you now requires alignment, not availability. And alignment is far more demanding than attention. Most men never reach this stage because they compromise their standards to relieve discomfort. They trade dignity for reassurance. The Stoic man does the opposite. He tolerates discomfort to preserve self-respect. And self-respect, once recognized, creates emotional gravity that does not fade easily. When realization becomes respect, the dynamic changes permanently. Whether she reaches out or not becomes secondary. The important shift has already happened. You are no longer evaluated emotionally. You are evaluated structurally as a man with boundaries, as a man with discipline, as a man whose calm was not conditional. And that is why long after emotions settle, your presence still carries weight. Not because you asked for it, but because you never abandoned who you were to be chosen. Section 7. Why her realization comes too late to control you. There is a final shift that occurs once everything has already settled inside you, and it is the moment her realization loses its power over your direction. Stoicism teaches that true strength is not found in being desired, but in being unchanged by desire. When a woman finally understands the weight of what she lost, the dynamic has already moved beyond emotional negotiation. At this stage, her realization no longer triggers reaction in you. You are not waiting for her clarity, and you are not orienting your life around whether she returns. Your emotional state is no longer suspended between hope and detachment. It is anchored, and anchoring is what removes leverage completely. This is often when she feels the strongest pull, not because she suddenly wants commitment, but because she senses that influence has expired. Emotional control only exists where emotional response is expected. When you remain calm, even after being recognized, something fundamental shifts. Her awareness arrives too late to reshape the outcome. Stoicism explains that people feel loss most intensely when recovery is no longer guaranteed. As long as she believed your emotional presence was recoverable, there was no urgency. But once she realizes that your peace does not depend on her acknowledgement, her realization deepens into respect mixed with distance. That combination is powerful, but it is no longer directive. Most men live their lives waiting for this realization. The Stoic man does not. He builds a life where realization is irrelevant. If she returns, he remains himself. If she disappears, he remains himself. There is no emotional pivot because there is no emotional dependency. This is why her realization feels heavy but ineffective. She may see your value clearly now, but clarity does not equal access. Access requires alignment, and alignment cannot be forced retroactively. The door was never slammed. It simply closed when your inner order became non-negotiable. Stoicism teaches that the highest position is not being wanted, but being self-directed. When your life moves forward, regardless of recognition, you become unmovable. And what cannot be moved cannot be controlled. This is the final truth. She may realize she needed you. She may feel the loss deeply. But the man you became no longer needs her realization to validate his path. That is not revenge. That is freedom. In short, what this entire journey reveals is something most men never understand until it is too late. A woman does not feel the weight of a man when he is trying to be valued. She feels it when he leaves with his inner order intact. Loss is not loud, power is not aggressive, and realization does not arrive when you demand it. Stoicism teaches that the strongest impact is created when nothing is forced. When you did not chase, argue, explain, or seek reassurance, you allowed reality to do its work. You did not attempt to control her emotions. You controlled yourself. And self-control is the one force that reshapes dynamics without resistance. She did not feel your loss immediately because certainty protected her. She felt it later when stability disappeared and contrast appeared. She realized your value not because you tried to prove it, but because it was no longer available. Your calm presence became visible only in its absence, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Most men wait for this realization as if it were a victory. The Stoic man does not. He understands that the purpose was never to be missed, needed, or regretted. The purpose was to reclaim his center so completely that her realization became irrelevant to his direction. If she returns, he remains grounded. If she stays away, he remains grounded. There is no emotional bargaining because there is no emotional dependence. This is the final Stoic lesson. Power is not making someone realize your worth. Power is becoming someone who no longer needs that realization. When you build a life rooted in discipline, self-respect, and inner order, loss stops being something you fear. It becomes something that clarifies. And clarity is freedom. That is why she feels your loss more than she ever expected. And that is why you move forward untouched by it. That is the Stoic way. Remember, knowledge means nothing without action. If you're ready to rise above emotion and lead with purpose, join the community today at the link below. Enroll once, grow forever.